Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Crystalcast, episode number 2. I'm here with my co-host Juan Silva. Juan, it's good to have you back again.
Yeah, it's very good to be here, Ross. Thank you so much. And yeah, ready for this.
We've got quite a few topics to cover, so sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode.
And we would like to thank all our sponsors, starting with Jennifer from 1 to 3 Accounting.
We've also got Reese Brace from Migration Insurance Brokers.
And Paul Wilcox from Oasis King Real Estate.
And thank you very much to those individuals, because without it we wouldn't be able to bring those episodes on a weekly basis free of charge. And now on to news of the week. So there's been quite a bit of changes happening, I suppose, across all sections of immigration. So the first one that I wanted to point out is that there's been a number of changes within the Fair Work Act. Now, without going into specific legislation, just because it's quite dense, the changes refer more around being able to contact employees outside work hours, and also just setting, I suppose, penalties when it comes to breaching those terms and conditions of employment. Now, those penalties have existed for quite some time, but the Fair Work provisions are now providing a bit more guideline as to how it's going to be enforced. So it is good if you are an employer to be aware of what those changes are, and definitely speak with your HR representative about what sort of policies might need to be put into your particular workplace, because it's going to be different depending on what industry you operate in.
Yeah, that's right. And another new, the ACS skill assessment fees have gone up. So you have to be aware of this and inform your clients about the specific fees to be paid.
And also, we finally had the invitation round this week for the ACT. Again, cross-section of occupations have been invited, quite a small invitation round, but it does go hand in hand with what we've been saying earlier, how states are going to be issuing sort of micro invitation rounds. No date yet as to when the next invitation round has been, but hopefully some of your clients should have received an invitation on the 19th.
Yeah, and the department released what is called the breakdown of administration of immigration. And let's have a look about the statistics, because they're quite interesting. They released the numbers of how the temporary visas and the permanent visas are behaving. And for example, we have on the student visas an increase of 19.7%. Temporary protection actually decreased to by 55%. Temporary residents or employment visas had a quite significant increase of 36%. Temporary resident in the skilled employment grew by 23.9%. Visitor increased by 13.3%. And working holiday makers had a very notable growth of 51.7%. Now, the grand total overall was an increase of 15% in temporary visa holders.
Yeah, it's these are interesting statistics. I've just sort of noticed the increase in the temporary employment visas. I think that might also have to do with the fact that the pandemic stream's been abolished, so employers kind of need to go back to that traditional avenue of sponsoring workers as opposed to having them on a 408 visa. That's really interesting. And just on some of the stats regarding the permanent visas now, in terms of the skilled visa trends, there's been a significant increase of 84.3% on skilled visa lodgements, and that is, quite a massive increase. So 84.3% during the last financial year, and there was a slight slowdown in this particular financial year, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there was that COVID backlog. In terms of regional migration, there was an announcement made, this goes back to the migration strategy, that Direction 100 was going to be amended to put regional migration first, and we're definitely seeing that as well. And also just in relation to designated area migration agreements, the utilization rate or the utilization of using DAMAs has gone up by 90%, which is just astounding. there's 12 DARMAs available. We're certainly seeing a lot more inquiries in relation to designated area migration agreements, and I think it also speaks about the rigid 482 visa pathways and a few uncertainties that we discussed last week. And I suppose it also supports what we were talking about last week, that DARMAs and company-specific labour agreements are certainly there to stay. So 90% increase, that's massive.
Yeah, that's really big. I think that must are really good, and providing those concessions options. Really beneficial for employees.
For regional employers, 100%. And now on to the topic of the week. I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about skilled migration, Juan, because, well, it is what's in for 2024, but this week I thought we'd do something different. Let's discuss partner visas.
Yes, and relationships in 2024.
Relationships in 2024, yes.
Yeah.
I suppose just to kind of start us off, you've got the usual 4 pillars. I think everyone sort of knows what they are. And it is a little bit, I suppose, difficult to explain to clients, well, what do you need to demonstrate? So I like to use the analogy of, picture an empty room, and that's sort of how you start off demonstrating your relationship. And then everyone contributes bits and pieces until the room becomes a dwelling somewhere where you can live. So that's how you need to picture evidencing your relationship. It's not about contributing equally, because sometimes it doesn't work. So if you picture it like a canvas or an empty room and you fill that up, that is how you evidence the relationship.
That's a very good analogy, Ross. I must say, I love your analogies.
There'll be more to come.
Yeah. They're really good to understand this whole concept of the relationship, of a partnership, right? And yeah, I think we have to consider all these 4 pillars, but also go into the definitions, into the details. In this case, a marriage relationship, a de facto relationship. What is the regulations? How is the definition of a de facto relationship?
Yeah, well, look, the definition. If you look at the definition of de facto relationship, it is quite sort of I suppose narrow. And what we're going to be discussing today, which is very interesting, to the exclusion of all others. I really want to explore that definition, because there's actually been a bit of case law about this as well. And there's been case law about the definition of de facto. So you've got a spouse-like relationship to the exclusion of all others. But I suppose what we're going to be looking at is, well, how do online dating apps play into this? We've got Tinder, we've got Grindr, we've got Bumble. I'm just trying to think of more dating apps.
Yeah, there are so many nowadays. Every time there are new features for the kind of relationship people is looking for.
Yeah,
and it's very interesting you touching the exclusivity.
Yeah.
And how people is connecting nowadays, because back in the days I can think of maybe people dating in a bar or at a party, which still happens, of course.
Yeah.
But we have to think about today's age to date, how people is connecting, and apps are definitely now playing a huge role, because people is finding their one through an app.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I think maybe there's also a bit of a misconception about the apps, but I've seen advertisements for, if you want to meet someone who's professional, for example.
Right.
So there's just so much variety, and I suppose, we do want that instant, whatever it might be, instant service, instant relationships, I suppose. Apps give you that. It's a bit of a vetting process, rather than going to the bar and finding out if you're sort of compatible. You've got a bit of a vetting process, but also, there's other things like age difference.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to explore that, how the department looks at that, because we've had a couple of cases where there's been sort of an age difference, and whilst it's not in the regulations, it doesn't say you have to be of a particular age.
Right.
I do believe that there is that perceived bias, because these applications, well, we have applications at the AET, And also I find that they are scrutinized a bit more. So I'd like to explore that a bit more today.
100%, because I think everyone deserves love, everyone deserves the opportunity, regardless of the age, regardless of what sort of couple or relationship it is. So yeah, I think it's very interesting, and let's explore this a bit more. Hey,
let's get straight into it. Now, just before we start discussing the questions that I've got in mind as well, I think it is important that we have a source. So when we look at de facto relationship, we do need to look at Section 5CB of the Migration Act, and I know that you've got a couple of comments on that.
Correct. So yeah, that's cool. So let's go like in every point and explore how the law defines it before we speaks about the rest. So de facto, when they have a mutual commitment to a shared life to the exclusion of all others, I think it is important to pay attention right now to the exclusion of all others. Yes. The relationship between them is genuine and continuing, and they live together, and they do not live separately or apart on a permanent basis.
Yeah, and just if I can make a comment on that as well, again, there's been a lot of case law about what is permanent. You know, is there a definition? So, for example, if I've got a contract of employment in a different city, is that a permanent arrangement? Because we know that jobs aren't permanent. I'd like everything to be permanent and stable, but that's just not how the world works. So we'll talk about that as well. And I do feel that the department is slowly coming around to, you know, definition of various types of relationships.
That's right.
Alrighty, now the way that I thought we could do this segment is let's just have a couple of open-ended questions so that we can explore this topic a bit more. You know, in your view, Juan, well, what's monogamy?
Well, monogamy, I think, speaks about again the exclusivity of being with someone, being loyal to that one person you see as your partner, and not looking around, entertaining yourself outside of that relationship. I think that's monogamy.
So would it be, are we talking about physical monogamy? Are we talking about emotional monogamy?
All of them.
All of them?
If I'm going to be loyal to you, I'm going to be loyal in all the senses, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's sort of, well, that is the basis of how partner visas are formed. And I think, you know, when I speak with clients as well, and when there's, I suppose, that question about monogamy, it does place a question as to whether we're talking about a spouse-like relationship or potentially kind of, you know, we're dating at the moment as opposed to being in a relationship. But then it also, you know, the concept of open relationships, that's been around, well, I don't know how long that's been around for, I'm not a historian, but it is a concept that's not new, it's not innovation. What about open relationships? How do they play into the role of partner visas?
Yeah, I think this subject is really important because now we're hearing more and more. And I think we have to be aware. We have to understand what people is about nowadays because we see this couple in our consultations. And we have had cases where, you know, they are exploring things outside of the traditional concept, if you want to call it, of a relationship. So open relationship is maybe when you're allowing yourself to try something outside of that one way relationship. Right.
And I think it's important to note as well that well, open relationships, an emphasis on the relationship, it's not infidelity. Because infidelity is something that you would do without a consent of your other partner.
Exactly. Yeah.
Generally when they're unaware, whether that's a one-off instance or whether that's a recurring sort of affair. This is not what we're talking about. An open relationship would genuinely involve consensus between the couple to enter into arrangement where both parties agree as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Absolutely. And I think that's absolutely up to the couple.
Yeah.
So the fact like that you're like consensually doing something outside of the relationship doesn't affect the fact that you are with that one person, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose the other important point is, it is about consent. So as I mentioned earlier, um, open relationships, it's not infidelity, and that should be brought up. It's a very important point, because infidelity is, well, essentially, it's doing something behind your partner's back. It could be emotional, it could be physical, but the key here is that the other partner is unaware of it or hasn't consented to it. Whereas an open relationship, it generally requires a consensus from both parties, and that's normally how it goes. And there's there's different examples of why that might be. It could be, I don't know, we spoke earlier about this. It could be due to long distance. It could be due to work. So in your opinion, does it negate the concept of a spouse-like relationship as per Section 5CB of the Migration Act?
Good question, Ross. I think it doesn't because, like you said, when there is a consensus in between two people, I think that speaks about their agreement. So these two people are still the ones.
Yeah,
So I think for the purposes of the regulations and the definition, that doesn't have to be with it because it's not infidelity. And like I think when we speak about the exclusion of all this, it might be a bit confusing, but what you're gonna present to a partner piece is your partner.
yeah,
Like when you englobe those four pillars, because I don't think you're gonna do comply with the four pillars, like all the socials, all the commitment, with two, three, four people.
well, that's what I was going to say as well, because I suppose if you're in an open relationship with your partner, you would still have all the other pillars. You're still seen socially as a couple.
Exactly, yeah.
You're still contributing financially, and you still see the relationship as a long-term relationship. So going back to my room analogy, you're still decorating that room.
Yeah.
So in my view, I would have to agree as well. I don't think that I think an open relationship is a different kind of relationship, and I think it should just stop there.
Exactly.
It's sort of how important is sex in a relationship. Just because a couple doesn't have sex doesn't mean that they're not in a relationship. And there were cases before the AET where that concept was discussed explicitly because a partner visa was refused because there was no evidence that the couple were having sex, which I think is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like very personal.
It is
right?
very personal, and the tribunal agreed that there's more to the relationship than the physical aspect.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like seeing those points like as opposite.
Yeah.
Like whereas there could be a couple that may fall into the perfect definition of
Yeah.
Section 5CB, but there is no sex or intimacy.
Yeah.
Whereas there could be the other couple that might be not seen or seen that they fall into the definition and have all these experiences.
Yeah.
But who is anyone to sort of judge or define? I think when we put this in front of the assessment of a partner visa, who's going to count is that one that is in the application.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we always need to bring it back to those four pillars and focus on that. And I know you mentioned before sort of falling in that perfect definition of a partner visa. I'm waiting to see one. I've been doing this for 15 years and there's just no such thing as a perfect partner visa in my view. So you kind of just need to focus on the regulatory aspects and think about how you're going to address other things as well.
Yeah, and again, Ross, I think this topic is good to speak about it.
Yeah.
Because there are a little bit of a taboo, and we need to be aware of all these things.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly.
But like we have to be as human as possible when assessing and having these people in our consultations and the everyday life. Because nowadays you see troubles, for example.
Yes, I was actually going to ask you.
Which is something like wow, like.
I mean, I'm sort of new to this concept, but what's a throuple?
Throuples nowadays is you literally date two people. So they're like not a couple, it's a throuple. So it's a three people in a relationship. Now it might be a little bit hard to grasp the concept on how you can
Yeah.
be equally like in two or three ways, you know?
Yeah. And I suppose do we have straight thruples? Is it gay thruples, or is it just sort of a cross section?
I think you see everything nowadays.
You do.
It's fascinating. Like they're
Yeah.
even going back to the apps. Like the other day, I came across with an app which allows you to put all your features and what you're looking for. And there's a lot of people looking specifically to enter in a relationship with a couple, with an established couple.
No, that's really interesting. And you know, when I deliver CPDs, we don't actually talk about content like that because it's, well, I wouldn't say it's rigid, but it's more focused on, I suppose, the policy. So it's nice to talk about this because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I'm using experiences from all the consultations that I've been to, and like you said, I think it's important when someone presents you with a partner visa case that's a little bit outside the box or what you might be used to, you still need to keep that sort of objective mindset and think, okay, well, this is the relationship. How am I going to assess it as a practitioner? Yeah.
100%. And I think like in cases of troubles, probably same as people that are married to two or three wives in, for example, there are cultures that allow it.
Yeah.
There are cultures that allow a man to be married to two or three women. In this case, I think the legislation is quite clear.
Yeah, so the legislation on that in Australia, so if it's a polygamy, the legislation is that the first spouse would be counted as the spouse for the purposes of the partner visa application. And I suppose where it's sort of a catch-22 situation, you're not going to be able to prove to the exclusion of all others if you have three other spouses, for example.
Correct.
And again, I think this is where this definition of de facto is getting a bit of a refurbishment, if you want to call it that. And I do think that in sort of the near future to come, we probably will see more case law in relation to that. It is starting now, but it will probably ramp up a little bit more.
100%.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting topic, and if you have any questions that you want to send across in regards to interesting partner visa cases that you've had, or have any comments about what's been discussed, feel free to leave your comments below in the comment section, or email us your comments across, and we'll be glad to read those out in our next episode. Alrighty, and this week we're going to have a bit of a trivia, and the way that the trivia works is I'm going to ask a number of questions. Some of them are true, some of them might be not true, and you're going to tell me whether you think it's a true story or whether it is false.
Right.
And the person who gets the most amount of points wins. Alrighty, question number 1. When I started this firm, I was drafting visa applications from my couch.
Well, nothing's true.
Yes. It was when I first started the firm, there was no office, and I was just sitting there on my couch drafting visa applications. We've come a long way. Question number 2. I've had a client who followed me to my apartment.
True.
Yes, that is also true. I had a client, and if you're watching, I'm talking about you. I've had a client who came to my residence to ask me for a status update on his visa application. So lesson, don't give out your residential address, and make sure that your letterhead does not contain your residential address. And final question, my favorite color is yellow.
That's absolutely false.
Correct. It's purple.
Right, now my turn.
I'm nervous, kind of.
All right, so my first visa to come to Australia was actually refused.
I think it's false.
Yeah, it felt. Thank God I never got a visa refusal for anywhere. And yeah, that's great.
I had to think about it and thought, well, maybe he came on a tourist visa or something. Also, 1 point.
When I was working in the UK, I had a bit of a problem with the employer, and for that reason, I got my visa cancelled.
False.
Yes. I think I'm making it too obvious. All right, how about this one? I've lived in 3 different countries.
True.
It's true.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, so it's a tie.
It's a tie. All right. Well, we've decided that if it's going to be a tie, we do scissors, paper, rock.
Okay.
Scissors, paper, rock.
Oh my god.
Scissors, paper, rock. Congratulations.
So this is what we've. So this brings us to the end of this episode. I think it's been very interesting, Ross.
I loved it. It was amazing.
Thank you so much, and see you in the 3rd episode.